My name is Thomas Reed. I'm 52 years old. And for the past 20 years, I gave everything to a company that didn't think twice before replacing me. I started at Greystone Construction when they didn't even have enough money to install carpet in the main office. I was employee number 6. Back then, we were scrappy, working long hours, eating Chinese takeout at our desks, pulling all-nighters just to land contracts. And through every storm, I stayed. When the CEO went through a divorce, I stepped up. When the market crashed in '08, I deferred my own salary just to keep payroll afloat. They used to call me the guy who never took a sick day. But apparently, that doesn't matter. When your CEO has a 27-year-old nephew who just got a shiny new business degree and wants your chair. I didn't even get a thank you. No retirement party. No goodbye lunch. Just a security guard and a paper that said my role was no longer aligned with the company's strategic direction. Strategic direction, right. What they didn't know is that I spent the last 6 months building a full financial audit, one that tracked every dollar and every dirty deal. And I didn't leave it in my desk. He smiled when he pushed me out. But that smile? It disappeared exactly 21 days later, in front of shareholders, cameras, and law enforcement. This is how I took down the empire I helped build. I still remember my first day at Greystone. It was nothing more than a rundown 2-room office above a dusty tile shop in Columbus, Ohio. The air conditioning didn't work, the windows rattled in the wind, and we all had to share a single printer. But none of that mattered to me. I was 32, hungry, and proud to finally land a stable job after years of working temp gigs and side hustles. The CEO back then, Mark Dillard, was a tough but fair guy. He said, "If you take care of this company, it'll take care of you." I believed him. In those early years, I did everything. I wasn't just the operations manager, I was the accountant, the HR guy, the IT support, and sometimes even the janitor. I stayed late to review permits, woke up early to be on site with foremen, and skipped vacations just to keep deadlines on track. My wife used to joke that I was married to Greystone more than I was to her, and truthfully, she wasn't wrong. Over time, the company grew. From 6 employees, we scaled to over 130. I watched it happen, floor by floor, contract by contract. I trained people who now lead entire departments. I built the first version of our internal audit system. I streamlined how we handled budgets and vendor payments. I even caught a senior project manager trying to embezzle money, and quietly handled it without making it public. That move saved the company over $500,000. Mark shook my hand and said, "You're the kind of guy this place was built for." For a long time, I believed I had found my place in the world. I wasn't flashy. I didn't ask for raises or bonuses. I just worked. Steady, loyal, and thorough. I lived in a modest home, drove a 10-year-old truck, and spent my weekends helping my neighbors fix broken sinks or mow their lawns. I didn't care about status, just purpose. Every Friday, I brought donuts for the staff. Every December, I used my own money to buy small gift cards for the janitors and interns. I never expected anything in return. But somewhere around year 17, something changed. Mark started bringing his nephew Jared around. First, it was just a few job shadowing sessions. No problem. Then Jared was suddenly promoted to Junior VP of Growth, whatever that meant. I tried to help the kid. I really did. He couldn't even read a profit-loss sheet without Googling half the terms. Still, I stayed patient. Explained things. Walked him through logistics. covered his mistakes, smoothed things over when he overpromised to a client. But something about Jared made me uneasy. He talked too much and listened too little. He took credit for others' work, treated junior staff like they were disposable, and always seemed more interested in his Instagram feed than our actual progress. One day, I overheard him laughing to a friend in the break room. "This place is a joke. Uncle's letting me run it in 2 years tops." I brushed it off. Maybe he was just immature. Maybe he'd grow into the role. But then came the little signs. My report started getting returned without review. Jared began attending senior leadership meetings alone. I stopped getting invites to client calls I used to lead. The CO's tone shifted too, colder, more distant. One morning, I walked in to find my parking spot reassigned. When I brought it up, the receptionist smiled awkwardly and said, "Oh, didn't they tell you? The exec floor's being reorganized." Still, I held on. I told myself this company had been part of my identity for 2 decades. I told myself loyalty still meant something. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew. Things were changing. And not in a way I could fix. It started with silence. Not the peaceful kind, the calculated, uncomfortable kind. For years, my inbox had been full. Approvals, updates, emergencies. I was the guy who made sure the entire machine ran smooth. But now, my emails went unanswered for days. Reports I submitted were marked, read, but never acknowledged. A financial discrepancy I flagged, nearly $48,000 in duplicate vendor billing, vanished from the records before I could follow up. I'd spent my life mastering the rhythm of the company, and now I was being tuned out. Meetings were suddenly rescheduled without explanation. My calendar, once packed, now sat blank most days. Jared, meanwhile, walked around like he owned the place, offering loud solutions in meetings he didn't understand, interrupting engineers mid-demo, pitching app ideas to clients who just wanted their parking lots built on time. At first, I tried not to take it personally. Companies evolve. Roles shift. Maybe I was just being phased into a more advisory capacity. But then came the numbers. I always kept a shadow spreadsheet just for my own sanity. Every contract, payout, and material cost was cross-checked with invoices. It wasn't required, but I did it out of habit. And that habit saved me. Because the numbers didn't add up. Payments were being rerouted to new subcontractors, names I didn't recognize. Some of them didn't even have websites. Others had addresses that led to P.O. boxes. A $112,000 invoice for strategic market development went to a company called JM Growth Partners. I later discovered it was registered under Jared's college roommate. I brought it up, quietly. I forwarded a flagged report to our internal finance lead. No response. I sent a follow-up, nothing. 2 days later, I got called into a meeting with Jared and the CO. No agenda, no smiles. Just a closed door and a very short conversation. Mark leaned back and said, "We're heading in a new direction, Tom. We think it's time to start transferring some of your responsibilities slowly, just to free you up for more flexible advisory work." Flexible advisory. I'd built that job description. It was the corporate way of saying, "You're done here. We're just not ready to admit it yet." I nodded. Didn't argue. Just listened. But inside, something snapped. When I walked out of that room, I didn't go back to my desk. I went to the server room. There was something about the way they spoke, too casual, too polished, like they'd rehearsed it. And I knew deep down that whatever was going on, It was bigger than just pushing me out. So I logged into the internal audit platform I'd helped design, the one Jared and his crew didn't even know existed. I opened the last 6 months of transaction logs, and I started looking closely. That night, I stayed at the office past 10 p.m. Everyone was gone. Even the janitor had left. I sat in the dark, the only light coming from the screen. And as I sifted through the ledgers, account statements, and manipulated invoices, a picture began to form. They weren't just shuffling me out. They were covering something up. And I had just scratched the surface. There's a strange kind of silence that happens right before everything breaks. It was a Thursday morning. I'd barely slept the night before, still replaying those manipulated numbers in my head. I walked into the office early, 6:45 a.m., before anyone else. I needed to confirm something. Just one thing. If it was true, I'd know there was no coming back from this. I went straight to the finance server. I had admin access, one of the few remaining privileges they hadn't revoked. And I opened a file I wasn't supposed to have, quarterly budget reallocations, internal only. Inside were entries that didn't go through legal. Funds were being quietly moved from core project accounts to something labeled Discretionary Development Fund. But that fund didn't exist in our official books. I clicked open the transaction history. And there it was. A 6-figure wire transfer, split into 3 parts, going to shell companies tied to Jared's name, one of which was literally registered 2 weeks before I was reassigned. The approval line? Forged. My name was on it. My digital signature. My password. I didn't authorize any of it. Beat. Silence. That's when it hit me. They weren't just stealing money. They were using my legacy, my reputation, to launder it. They knew that if anything looked suspicious in the books, I'd be the last person anyone would question. I had 20 years of spotless records. Auditors trusted me blindly. Clients praised me publicly. Internally, I was known as the guy who kept us audit-proof. So they used that trust to hide their mess. I remember sitting there, staring at the screen. My hands didn't move. My breathing slowed. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just empty. But in that emptiness, something shifted. For 20 years, I had defended this company, cleaned its messes, protected its name, served it without ego. I had passed up job offers, sacrificed weekends, birthdays, even my own health. And now, I was being erased. Framed. Buried. I closed the file. Logged out. Walked to the break room. Poured myself a black coffee. Sat by the window like I had every morning for 2 decades. And right then, I made a decision. Slide beat. I didn't cry that morning. I didn't yell. I didn't even call a lawyer. I started planning. Not to survive. To end them. The day I discovered they forged my signature, I went home early, but not to rest. I opened the backup drive I kept in a fireproof safe in my garage. It had every audit report, email chain, invoice log, and vendor contract I'd ever handled at Greystone from the day I joined. I hadn't updated it in months because, well, I never thought I'd need to. That night, I made a fresh backup of everything from the last 6 months, emails, internal chat logs, accounting software exports, even meeting recordings from Zoom that hadn't been wiped from the cloud. I wasn't angry. I was focused. This wasn't about getting even. This was about surgical exposure, cutting away the rot without making noise. I created a folder called Integrity Protocol. Inside it, I began laying out my plan. First step, I needed legal eyes on everything. I contacted Rachel Morgan, an independent forensic auditor I'd worked with back in 2015 during a contractor embezzlement case. She was sharp, quiet, and most importantly, owed me a favor. I sent her encrypted files with a simple note. Rachel, off the record, tell me what you see. Within 48 hours, she replied, if half of this is real, it's felony-grade fraud. Do you want to go public? Not yet. Instead, I asked her to quietly start documenting everything: dates, transfers, fake companies, altered signatures, offshore routing trails. I wasn't going to accuse anyone. I was going to prove it, with the kind of proof that gets people fired, investigated, or indicted. Next, I reached out to Daniel Kim, an investigative reporter with the Herald-Times. He once did a feature on a school contractor bribery ring I'd helped expose years ago. I didn't tell him much, just that I had something big. He said, if it's real, I'll burn the story across every outlet. I told him to wait. Just a little longer. Meanwhile, at the office, I became invisible. I smiled at Jared in the hallway, complimented his vision, attended the pointless innovation brainstorming meetings, and nodded along while he rambled about rebranding Greystone as a tech-forward construction ecosystem. He thought he'd won, that I'd accepted my fate. What he didn't know is that every time he sent a payment, held a meeting, or opened a file, I had already tracked it. Every lie he told built my case tighter. Every fake contract gave me leverage. I even created a mirror folder on the company's server labeled Q4 Planning Docs. It looked boring. It wasn't. It was filled with screenshots, metadata logs, invoice overlays, layered with time stamps and chain of custody records. Anyone who opened that folder and knew what to look for would know exactly what was going on. And I made sure someone would. The board of directors was scheduled to meet during the company's annual leadership gala, a fancy black-tie event with speeches, press, and investors. Jared was preparing to give his first public address. He even practiced in front of the mirror, according to his assistant. I decided that night would be the stage point. 3 days before the gala, I sent an anonymous tip, with attachments, to the board's internal ethics committee, the IRS whistleblower division, and Daniel at the Herald. I also mailed a hard drive to Greystone's legal firm, not the internal counsel, but the outside firm that handles SEC compliance. Everything was timed to activate the morning of the gala. Then, I waited. No warnings. No goodbyes. No trace that I was behind any of it. Let them smile on that stage. Let them toast to their stolen empire. Because by the time they raised their glasses, they'd already be bleeding. The morning of the gala arrived like any other, but I knew by noon everything would be different. I didn't attend. Of course not. I wasn't invited. Instead, I sat at a diner across town, black coffee in hand, watching the press coverage roll in on my tablet. Greystone's annual leadership summit, the company's biggest PR moment of the year, live-streamed with banners reading, "Building the Future Together." The camera panned across the marble lobby, the red carpet, the investors in $1,000 suits, smiling for the press. And then it found him. Jared, in a tailored blue suit, standing behind the podium like he belonged there. He looked confident. Too confident. I could almost hear his voice. This year, we've doubled our growth, optimized our digital transformation pipeline, and positioned Greystone as an innovator in both urban infrastructure and executive strategy. Buzzwords. Flash. Emptiness. But what Jared didn't know What none of them knew was that while he stood there lying, three things were happening. The board of directors was receiving a secure email with a subject line that read, "Urgent ethics breach involving senior executives." Attached were the files from the Q4 planning folder, plus Rachel's forensic summary. The SEC and IRS both received whistleblower packets, flagged as high priority due to evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and fraudulent misappropriation of investor funds. And most importantly, Daniel Kim's article went live. Headline: Leaked audit reveals massive fraud at Greystone Construction. Sources point to CEO's nephew at the center. Within minutes, the link began to spread. First quietly, then violently. At 11:42 a.m., the live stream abruptly froze. I refreshed the page. Black screen. 10 minutes later, it cut back in, but now it was chaos. The camera was shaky. Security guards were rushing toward the stage. Jared's voice was no longer smooth. It was high-pitched, confused, panicked. "No, that's false information. It's fake. My uncle, someone call legal." You could hear phones ringing in the background. People standing. Board members whispering and walking out. The CEO, Mark, was nowhere to be seen. Then came the real silence. By 12:05 p.m., the Herald published an update. Greystone under federal investigation. CEO and VP no longer available for comment. By 1 p.m., trading of Greystone stock was temporarily suspended. And by 3 p.m., Mark Dillard and Jared were both escorted out of company headquarters by 2 federal agents. No handcuffs yet, but the message was loud and clear. That night, I watched the 6 p.m. news. The anchor read directly from the teleprompter. Sources inside Greystone report a whistleblower's audit has exposed years of financial misconduct, including forged records and embezzlement. Investigators believe the fraud totals in the multi-million-dollar range. An internal compliance officer is being credited with uncovering the scandal. They never named me. They didn't have to. I was already gone. Just gone in a different way. Not erased. Not buried. But invisible by choice. The kind of invisible that moves things behind the scenes, without ever being seen. I didn't smile that night. I just sat on my back porch, glass of water in hand, and listened to the sound of nothing. That was enough. That was just as it's been 14 months since the gala. Since then, Greystone's name has all but vanished. Their biggest government contracts were frozen. Investors fled. The board dissolved within 90 days. Jared pled guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud. Mark, the CEO, took a plea deal to avoid prison, but he lost everything. The company we built was gone. But I didn't celebrate, because the truth is, when you burn something down, even if it deserved it, the smoke still clings to you for a while. I didn't return to corporate life. I couldn't. Instead, I opened a small consultancy, just me, a laptop, and a mission. To help honest people build things that last. I don't advertise. I don't pitch. But my name still carries weight. The young contractors who remember how I treated them now bring me in to review their books, advise on compliance, protect them from the same corruption I once watched unfold. And I do it quietly. No credit, no limelight. Just clean, clear work. I bought a cabin 2 hours outside the city. Nothing fancy. Just trees, silence, and a dog named Radar who thinks he's tougher than he is. Every morning, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and listen to the world before it wakes up. Sometimes, people ask me if I miss it, the company, the title, the life I once had. I don't, because what I had wasn't real in the end. What I have now, it's smaller, but it's mine. I keep one thing from the past, my Greystone ID badge. Not for nostalgia, but as a reminder that no matter how loyal you are, no matter how much you give, if you don't protect your own name, someone else will use it against you. But I learned something even more important than that. That revenge doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes, the most powerful justice is silence. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let them sit with the question, who exposed us? I never answered it. And I never will. Beat. Final reflective line. Slow delivery. She took everything. Except my soul. And from that, I rebuilt my life, not for them, not for revenge, but for me. If this story hit you hard, subscribe for more. And remember, protect your peace, even when the world turns on you.